Wardrobe for the Bass Tour Anglers podcast is provided by Koppel Outfitters. Go have an adventure. Visit them online at www.koppelOutfitters.com and on social media at Koppel Outfitters. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our trending segment. Our guest today began his pro career in the mid-1980s. Over the course of 33 pro tour seasons, he has 76 top 10 finishes, 5 tour wins. He was a 2002 Bassmaster Classic winner and has qualified for the Classic 16 times. He's qualified for the FLW Championship 11 times. He was the BASS Angler of the Year in 2003, the FLW Angler of the Year in 2002, and again in 2007, and he was inducted into the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame this past year in 2020. Jay Yelas, welcome to our show. Thanks for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too. I hope I got those numbers right. There's an awful lot of information to cipher through when you're looking up your career.
You do something long enough, you do a few things right, and if you get enough chances.
Hey, Jay, what does this induction to the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame mean to you? It would seem like a crowning jewel, but
oh yes,
what's your takeaway on that?
Absolutely, yeah. That is something that gosh, it meant the world to me and my family when that happened last year in 2020, and it's just really comprises your body of work over 30 plus years of fishing. And it's great to know that people, respect it, and they acknowledge some of your accomplishments and, the impact and influence that you've had that's been in a positive way for the sport over all those years. So yeah, that's something that you can't just go out and get that by having a good year. You can win Angler of the Year or win a tournament or whatever, but it takes decades to earn the Hall of Fame nomination and induction. So yeah, it's just a tremendous blessing and a huge honor for me, no doubt.
Talk a little bit about those early Western days, because you and I are from a similar generation, and I recall Western Bass days and U.S. Bass. You fished quite a few of those events back in those days, right?
I did. Yeah, that's where I got my start. You remember back in the 80s, I remember graduating from college at Oregon State in June of 1987. And I ran right down to Lake Mead, and I wanted to fish that US Open so bad. And that was in July that year. And that was at that time, the biggest tournament in the Western part of the United States each year. I guess it still is. And so I ran down there, and I remember, I think I was leading that the first day or something. It was crazy. I ended up finishing in 6th place. I remember that for sure. And that was my first pro tournament. And it was and then I started fishing everything I could get my hands on out west, U.S. Bass, West Coast Bass, the Sun Country, which is a New Mexico circuit, All-Star, which was around, Arizona circuit, the Red Man tournaments. And yeah, I just any tournament in the desert Southwest, I signed up for it back in those days, and that brought me through the late 80s, and Bass came to Lake Mead in 1989, and that was my first Bassmaster tournament was at Lake Mead in April of 89. And so that's where I got started back then, and it was definitely Western roots for me.
Koppel Outfitters wants you to go have an adventure now. Koppel Outfitters specializes in adventure gear. Anything you need for getting outside, Koppel Outfitters has it and more. Go have an adventure now. We're talking to Jay Yelas, who has got a storied career. He's a 2020 Bass Fishing Hall of Fame inductee, and so many other awards. We could go on all day talking about him. Jay, you grew up in Santa Barbara, and your lake that you spent all those years learning to fish was Lake Cachuma. I'm familiar with Cachuma. I've grown up in Southern California myself. Tell us about those years a little bit.
Yeah, that's where I got my start. Where I learned how to bass fish was on Lake Kachuma. Went to high school in Santa Barbara at San Marcos High School, and every weekend, I'd be up at Lake Kachuma. That was our nearest bass lake, and that's where I met my mentor, Bill Cedar. And Bill taught me how to bass fish. He was retired, and he lived on the lake, and he fished it 5 days a week, and he really poured into me everything he knew. And that's how I learned. And this is, pre-internet days, guys. You got to remember there was a time in bass fishing where we didn't have YouTube videos or Bass Live to watch or any of that stuff. We had to learn how to fish from another human being. And so I learned from Bill Cedar, my mentor, and he knew a lot about bass fishing. And you fish the same lake every day for decades, and he really understood that lake and those fish. So that's where I learned how to bass fish and caught my first 10-pounder there, and had a lot of great memories. After I moved away, and I still would travel back for years to fish with Bill once a year, just until he passed away about 10 years ago. But yeah, I love Lake Kachuma. A lot of great memories there for me.
You said you fished a lot of stuff out here in the West, and I can remember being in the West and knowing the name Jay Yelas, a lot of the local stuff. What year did you decide to make that big move and head east and go after the quote unquote big time stuff? What year was that? Late 80s?
Yeah, I fished my first Bassmaster tournament in 1989 at Lake Mead. And then my first year fishing the Bassmaster Tour was started in 90. And it was, and so I remember the first tournaments I fished back in New York and in Florida. I'd drive there from the West Coast. And after a few of those trips, I decided to heck with that. So in sometime in 1991, my wife Jill and we moved to Texas to get closer to all the tournaments. It just made a lot of sense to get located, and learn a lot of those southeastern fisheries, which was where most of the bass tournaments are at. So yeah, that's about when I started back in the late 80s, and then moved to Texas in 91.
Now, when you first started fishing BASS, were they still pro versus pro in those events?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay. They called those tournaments invitationals.
Right.
The Bass invitationals. They were boat-on-boat draws. There'd be 300 pros would sign up for a tournament. That was a full field, and then they'd pair you together. It'd be 150 boats fishing, and you'd have to many times flip a coin to see whose boat you were going to take. And then you had to decide whose water you were going to fish. And that's how most everybody got started in the sport back, prior to about, I think they started all the pro-ams about in the late 90s. And but all through the 80s and early 90s, we had to fish those invitationals.
Jay, I think someday I want to create a video or something that captures that, because I don't think a lot of our younger anglers today realized it was that way. And I just some of the stories that I know, and I'm sure some of the stories that you could tell us about those are just absolutely gems. If you got any that come to mind right now, we'd love to hear something.
Oh, well, I mean, it was never really, nobody looked forward to fishing that way, because you could never fully, or rarely could you ever fully exploit what you wanted to do. And you couldn't even use your boat all the time. I mean, if you were the first day of those tournaments was absolutely crucial. If you caught them the first day, and your day two partner, the etiquette was whoever had most weight on day one, they'd take their boat on day two and go to their fish. So the first day was just crucial. But at the same time, I learned a lot by fishing with those guys. I remember I drew people like Guido Hibden. I fished with Larry Nixon. I drew George Cochran. I drew Davey Height, Guy Aker, Jimmy Houston. I could go on and on and on. And so I got to fish with a lot of those legends, and I learned a lot from each of those. So, but every time you draw one of those, I remember fishing with Nixon at Megabucks in Florida, and he ended up, he won all the Megabucks back
in. Did. Yes,
he did. Right. So, and I went with Larry, and I got a good education on how to fish a Texas rig, black grape, worm, and lily pads down there in the Harris chain. And I didn't know. I mean, coming from out west, that was fishing a worm and lily pads was something I didn't know how to do, but hey, I learned how to do it that day, and I've had some good luck ever since then. Every time we go to Florida, so Larry would use a little 6-foot pistol grip rod. I mean, but that was actually one of the keys to what he was doing, because that allowed him to just really work the worm just in a real subtle fashion that you can't give a bait that action with a flipping stick. It's just a totally different deal. But anyway, yeah, a lot of great experiences and great memories. And, but at the same time, everybody was thrilled when we finally went to a Pro-Am format across the board, where you could always use your own boat and go fish wherever you wanted to fish.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever interviewed anybody that was really loved those days. I think they all kind of say,
No.
"Yeah, you're good, good stuff," but it was so much better when you
Oh yeah,
your own ship. Yeah.
Well, that's just it's the evolution of our sport. That's when Ray Scott started bass in the 70s, and that's all the tournaments were always that way. I think the first tournament was in 1967 at Beaver Lake, Arkansas, and then all from then through the 70s and the 80s to about the mid 90s, they were all invitationals where you boat on boat pairings, and you had to decide whose boat to take. And so, and then it all changed. Bass started having the top 100 Pro-Ams back in I think the mid 90s, and then they kind of worked. The Pro-Ams were very popular format, and the sport just kind of switched over that way. And there's no boat on boat tournaments anymore that I'm aware of. So it's just a better deal all the way around.
2002 and 2003 were a couple of absolutely amazing years for you. If I did the math right, within about an 18-month period, you won the Bassmaster Classic at Lay Lake. Then you were the 2002 FLW Angler of the Year, and then you came back and won the BASS Angler of the Year the following year. What was that like?
Yeah, that was great. That was the pinnacle of my bass fishing career. There's no doubt. And I was just kind of at that age where everything kind of came together. You'll see most careers of pros tend to peak when they're between, in their late 30s to early 40s. And about, in 2002, that's about the age I was back then. I was in my late 30s, and it's just, everything kind of comes together. Your youthful enthusiasm and your mindset and your drive and your will to excel in the tournaments and all that is kind of peaking then. And you've got enough years under your belt. I mean, I'd fished, I don't know, 13 years or 14 years at that time. So I had enough experience to where I had some experience to lean on, but not too much to where it clouded my what I was doing. And the timing was just great, for me. And that seemed like everywhere I went, I just, things fell into place during that time frame. And 2002 would have been the best year I ever had, winning the FLW Angler of the Year and the Classic that year. I fished both circuits, and that's back then the schedules didn't conflict, and you could fish bass and FLW, which is what I did. I did that for like 3 years, and that's when my fishing that coincided with my best years ever, because I was really on the water all the time. We'd have 2-3 tournaments every month, and but then my kids started getting older, and I scaled back to just fishing one circuit so I could do more with my kids growing up and coach their teams and whatnot. So. But yeah, that was an amazing time. I'm thankful for those years, and they were a real blessing for sure.
I was going to say there weren't a whole lot of guys fishing both tours back then. Just a handful of guys, but...
Yeah, just a handful. I mean, it's a real commitment. It would burn you out, to be honest with you, by the end of the year. When you're on the road 3 weeks every month at a tournament, that's a grind of a lifestyle. But boy, you're just fishing every day. You're fishing, not just fishing, you're fishing tournaments every day almost. And so you really kind of get in the groove, and you're really getting, to where your instincts perk up, and you make the right moves, it seems like, more often than not when you're fishing tournaments that much. But that's what you see a lot of the young guys now that are doing really well. They're fishing a ton of tournaments. They can't really fish 2 circuits, but they can fish like the Elite Series and the Opens, or the MLF and the FLW Pro Circuit, and they just filling their schedule with tournaments. And that's a great a great plan for a young angler that wants to be a successful pro, especially in your early years when you're trying to really get established and get things going. So, but eventually I realized, there was more in life I wanted to do besides just fish bass tournaments. So
absolutely.
I would not trade that for anything. I loved coaching my kids' softball and basketball teams as they were growing up and doing a lot of family activities. And we were real involved with our church and different things like that. There's just there's a lot that life has to offer. And so I just, chose to just cut back after that period of time and fish one circuit. I don't regret it at all. At the same time, though, it is fun to look back during those years, those peak years of my career, and be like, wow, that was an amazing run.
Now, you moved to FLW full-time in 2006 and promptly won another Angler of the Year award. In those days, FLW had a number of team deals for pros. Were you part of that? Or was it a both thing?
Let's see, that would have been right. So I fished the 06 Classic, and then I moved on to FLW, and I did, like I said, I was fishing both circuits and I had to pick one or the other. So I went with FLW. I just enjoyed the experience at that time more. And so I went that way. Back then, ESPN owned Bass, and it was just a different feel, a different dynamic going on at the tournaments, different business model than what they have now. And so anyway, I went to FLW, and I was on the Chevy team for a few years to answer the question. And those were great years. I mean, FLW had a heck of a run there back in 06, 07. Remember, they were paying $1 million to the Cup winner and $1 million to fantasy fishing. And that was a great time in our sport too. Our purses still aren't as high as that was the pinnacle of the tournament purses in our sport was back then, right before the big recession hit in 08, and they really haven't come back since then to what they were prior to that. But I did that I fished FLW for like 12 years, I think. And then Bass offered me a spot back on the Elite Series in 2019 via a Legends exemption. And so I accepted that, and I've been fishing them with the Bass Elite Series the last 2 years, just loving it and having a great time being back with Bass. And so this year coming up, 2021, will be my third year back on the Elite Series.
You fished a few events with Major League Fishing. Did you fish in the?
No, I never did.
That new format that they have. You never fished any of those?
I never did fish any of those. Nope. I just didn't have the opportunity to. So I like the five fish format better anyhow. And I still think Bass is the biggest brand name in fishing. And so I'm happy right there fishing Bass. It suits me. I like, that's the granddaddy fishing circuit. And I'd love to make it back to the Classic one day to have a shot to win that again.
Koppel Outfitters specializes in adventure gear. Anything you need for getting outside, Koppel Outfitters has it and more. Go have an adventure now. Talking with Jay Yelas. He is a recent inductee to the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame. He's Bassmaster Classic winner in 2002. Jay, I've got a lot of fond Jay Yelas moments, but I think the one that stands out in my mind the most is the Superstar event you won in a cornfield.
Yeah, you remember that?
I do. I do, because cool. That was the water was it a foot deep when you were fishing?
Yeah, it was about a foot deep. That goes back to 1995. Not many people remember that tournament. And
I'm no guy.
I appreciate you bringing that up, because that was at the time, that was like the second biggest tournament in the nation each year after the Classic. And so, for a little history here for your younger fans, started what they called a Superstars tournament, and they had it in 93, 94, and 95. And then that was it. But it was just like the Classic. They'd weigh in inside of a big indoor arena, tens of thousands of fans. And it was a major deal. And to be invited to fish that, you had to just, you had to just be invited. And I think they invited like I can't remember the criteria. It was past classic winners, angler of the years, and recent tournament winners, or maybe off the all-time money list, I think was with bass was one of the criteria. And anyway, I just barely made it into that Superstars tournament. I was still young, early in my career. And I remember, the Illinois River is where we fished in Peoria, Illinois. And the river was flooded, big time flooded. I mean, I remember the locks were even underwater. We'd run right over the lock downstream, and the fish were up in fields, farmers' fields, Milo. I was fishing in Milo field. There was a little high spot in the middle of this field that was a foot deep, and the bass just kind of flooded out of the old river bottom in those fields. And, and that's where I found them, caught them on a spinner bait. And the Illinois River is a tough fishery, 10 or 12 pounds a day is really good. It used to win back then. And that's all I was catching, was 10 or 12 pounds a day. But it was enough to win it. That was a big deal. That was the biggest thing I'd won at that time. And it was fun. I remember my mom and dad were there, and my wife, Jill, and it was a great memory. Appreciate you bringing that one up.
Well, it's one of those things. And by the way, anybody that wants to watch this, there are old bass. I'm sorry to use the word old, but it's you and me talking here.
Yeah.
There's old episodes of the Bassmaster Show that are on YouTube now. I mean, you can watch, events from the early 90s, and that's where I got to see that episode. I saw it when it was on in the day, but I also saw it again recently. Just a great thing. Spinner baits in a cornfield.
Spinner bait in a cornfield. Yep. Yeah, that was it, Keith. That's how we caught them. And that, I learned back, I guess prior to then, that when the rivers are flooding, the fish, they try to find the bank somewhere. And when you're in a river bottom, it's hard to find the shoreline.
Right.
You can go a long ways. And so this was, in a lake, it's a little bit different. You're usually steeper banks, but in those river bottoms are really big and wide. So anyway, that was a cool memory.
Probably should tell people that this was a harvested cornfield. It wasn't like there were tall stalks of corn out there.
No, it was a mix. There was some harvested corn and some Milo, and it was just, it was probably like 2 feet above the water level is where and I would just kind of spinner bait around the road, the little roads through there and the edges of that stuff. And, but it was really shallow, and, there were some road beds and clean spots. And I remember that being, I don't remember too much about it. That was a long time ago, Keith, but I remember catching every one of them on a spinner bait.
Yeah, you have to go back and watch that episode on YouTube.
Yeah. One of the cool things I remember about that tournament is some of the etiquette in our sport was the first day of that tournament, Gary Klein and Shaw Grigsby had also found the same spot. And they didn't catch them very good the first day. And I had a pretty good limit, and those guys conceded that spot to me. They never went back there the second or third day of the tournament. And if they would have, we would have probably split those fish up, and I wouldn't have won the tournament. So I'll never forget that sportsmanship that Gary and Shaw displayed. It was pretty awesome of them to do that.
Oh, that's something that I did not know about. That's a good caveat to that story. Hey, I know you're very involved with Cast for Kids, and I know it's something that is important to you. I'd like you to tell us a little bit about that program and what involved there.
Sure, Keith. So the Cast for Kids Foundation is a nonprofit charity that exists to provide fishing opportunities to special needs children. And it's been around for the 30th anniversary of the Cast for Kids Foundation. I didn't start Cast for Kids, but I was it started in 1991. I was invited to be a board member in 2005. And I sat on the board of Cast for Kids for 10 years. And then the founder, he retired in 2015. And so somebody needed to take his role as the executive director. And so I accepted an offer to do that. And so it's been a pure pleasure and a joy trying to grow that foundation and provide opportunities to special needs kids to get out and enjoy this great sport that we call fishing. And our events are they're more than just fishing opportunity. That in itself is great, but we really try to celebrate these kids at these events and really make the day special for them. And we do that by, after we pair the kids up with volunteer boaters or shore volunteers, and they help the kids fish, and they, try to really teach them how to tie knots and bait a hook and take a fish off the hook, the basic fundamentals of fishing. And then they try to encourage the kids too and cheer them on while they're fishing. After they fish, we have a picnic lunch for everyone there, all the volunteers. And then we have an awards ceremony where each kid is presented a plaque with their photograph in it, and the crowd cheers for them. And the kids get to come up to the front of the group and with their volunteers and talk about their day and what their favorite part of the day was. And everybody cheers for them. Sometimes they'll give them a standing ovation. And it's just, those kids just don't get many days where they're the center of everybody's attention. So it's really all about making these kids' day and just showing them a good time. And we use the great sport of fishing to do it. And it's really a lot of fun. A lot of these events around the country have been going for 20 plus years, and they've become annual affairs that the community looks forward to hosting each year. And so I have a few that I run myself, but most of our events are just run by volunteers, folks that volunteer to coordinate an event. And then we always send a staff person to attend each event, whether we help with the planning of it, and we attend the event the day of and really make it special for them. So I love it because it's a great way to give back and share the sport with fishing with these children that would never have an opportunity otherwise. I don't know if you know any special needs families, but they're usually so overwhelmed on the day-to-day, just getting by and making ends meet. And it's a lot of hardship, and they would never get to go out and fish. They don't have the time to learn the sport, for one thing, and a lot of them don't have the money to do it. So, we're providing basically a guided trip for a special needs child and their parents, or often their siblings, go. And there's just, it's all made possible by all these great, wonderful volunteers around the country that bring their boats out and are glad to help out and take the kids fishing. So it's a lot of fun. It's time well spent. And, nobody ever regretted going to a Cast for Kids event, taking one of those special needs children out fishing and making their days. It's a lot of fun.
Hey, Jay, I'm sure we have some viewers of this podcast that would be interested in finding an event or either finding an event for someone that they know to be a part of, or maybe even to volunteer. How would they get help? How would they get involved in something like this?
Yeah, they can go to our website. I have a whole list of events on there. castforkids.org. It's castforkids.org. And that's we have a whole list of events on a state-by-state basis on that website. And we're always looking to start new events too. You can get in touch with us. You can go to that castforkids.org and there's a contact page where you can email me or email somebody on the staff to inquire about hosting an event. And but yeah, it's just regular folks that love to fish and they love kids, and they're the ones that make these events happen. We just kind of provide the leadership and the planning to help put it together, and the insurance and all that goes into it. But it's a lot of fun. Yeah, it's right. Last year, due to COVID, we weren't able to have as many events as we normally do. We had 75 events around the nation in 2019. And last year, that COVID cut it about in half. But as soon as COVID's behind us, we're going to, we'll get right back out there to, hopefully having multiple events in every state in the country. That's the goal. So, but yeah, check us out at castforkids.org. We've got YouTube videos on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and all that. And it's a lot of people like following along because we post pictures every day of these kids in wheelchairs, catching a fish with a big smile on their face. If nothing else, it just brightens your day a little bit, looking at those photos of the kids.
Well, Jay, starting year number 34 here in a couple of weeks, the fire still burns pretty good?
Oh yeah, I still love fishing and tournament fishing, and we're heading down to Florida for next week is the first tournament. St. John's River with the first Bass Elite Series event. And I'm still, fired up to go. I still really enjoy it. I mean, fishing is what I do for fun. Even when I'm not in a tournament, if I will have a day off and I'm at home and I want to go do something, a lot of times I'll grab some friends or my kids or my wife, and we'll go out and fish for a day or for a half a day or whatever. So that's never changes. I love doing it, and I love the way my roles kind of change. Back when we first got into this racket, Keith, in the late '80s, I was the young kid on the block, and now I'm like one of the salty old veterans on the circuit. So I relish that, though. I like to try to provide a good example to the young kids and help them out, get started, and provide advice and all that. So the sport needs a few of these old veterans hanging around to lead by example. But we still can catch them too. I mean, look at Clark Wendlandt. He's about my age. He won Angler of the Year last year.
Yes, he did.
So that shows, Rick Clunn, he won a tournament a couple years ago and, into his 70s. So age is not a limiting factor in tournaments. I mean, the fish don't know how old you are. That's for sure.
I enjoyed watching both you and Rick at Lake Fork, the last event of the year. You guys, you guys got some good screen time in that event, and it was fun to see some names that I recalled from my younger days doing well.
Yeah, that's fun I think a lot of the fans I run into that are your age, my age, they pull for us, the generation guys. There's no doubt about it. And it's fun to be able to give them a thrill, something to cheer for every now and then. We don't get to catch them as much as often as we used to, it doesn't seem like, but we still have good tournaments from time to time. And it's still a lot of fun.
Well, you just opened that door. I think there's so many more. I think the quality of competition is so much higher today. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, there's no doubt about it. It's it's so easy to learn the sport now, and with the electronics, they've really fast forwarded the learning process of bass fishing, and so has Bass Live and YouTube and all these other internet mediums where people can learn the sport. So it's pretty easy game to learn anymore, but it's definitely more competitive. It keeps getting that way every year. Every year it gets more competitive as fishermen get better and better as time. It'll always be that way. Thankfully we do, we practice catch and release. Otherwise we catch all these fish up in these lakes and there wouldn't be any left. But thankfully bass, God made them good and hardy where they could handle going to a weigh-ins as long as they're cared for and have plenty of oxygen in the live wells, and they can be weighed and released and live to be caught again in another tournament, another day. But it's tough. These young kids are so tough. They're competitive as all get out, and they can really catch them. And they're really good with the new electronics, like you saw what Patrick Walters did at Lake Fork.
That was a clinic.
Garmin Live Scope. That was amazing. Just amazing. He wouldn't have been able to do that, a few years ago without the Live Scope. So things keep changing for sure. You just got to try to keep up with it all.
Well, Jay, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. It was good to catch up. It was, I think, a really good history lesson for people to learn all these things. And I appreciate being with us today.
No, absolutely. It's always a pleasure, Keith. Anytime you just holler. I'd be glad to be your guest.
We'll do it. We'll do. Thanks a lot. Take it easy.
All right. You take it here. Take care now.
All right. Goodbye.
All right. See you later. Bye.
Wardrobe for the Bass Tour Anglers podcast is provided by Koppel Outfitters. Go have an adventure. Visit them online at www.koppeloutfitters.com and on social media at Koppel Outfitters.